Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have two very special guests. I've been on their show twice. I actually hosted them on my StreamYard on the last show, which we did under a really fascinating movie that they really opened my eyes to many of the images and themes that were in it, and that was Under the Silver Lake. It's interesting because people had told me, hey, you got to watch this movie. I want to see it, but they suggested that we watch that. So I'm glad we did that. And then back in August, I was on their show to talk about one of the most paranoid movies ever made, Parallax View, and we talked about other subjects too, a little bit of West Memphis 3. But I reached out to them, invited them on my show to talk about a different movie, and I had a couple movies in mind, but they kind of latched on to this conspiracy movie that was made in 1997. And if you're watching on StreamYard or Rockfin, you'll see the poster for it. It has Mel Gibson, Julia Roberts. And there's a lot of kind of controversy around it. And it was nice for me kind of after, if I had watched it in 1997 with different eyes and a different understanding, it was nice for me at this age and not much time passing to see this film and understand a lot of the themes that were in it. But they also, there's a tie-in to this film with their research on PsyOp cinema. And so it's Tom and Brett from PsyOp cinema again. And the tie-in is that they did an analysis of a movie with Jared Leto, and that was chapter 27 about Mark David Chapman. And it ties in, and that is a whole nother story, but we can go into all those details and do a film analysis of this and also kind of bring in some of this information from chapter 27 in Chapman. So Tom and Brett of PsyOp Cinema, welcome onto the show. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates.
Thanks so much for having us, William. We really enjoyed being on here last time and having you on our show a couple times now. Looking forward to this talk too.
Cool. Me, likewise. I've been really looking forward to this. So for people who may not have heard our earlier two shows, or maybe the background, maybe you could do a brief intro, talk about what you're doing on PsyOp Cinema, and then we can just get into the analysis of this film, Conspiracy Theory.
Sure. So what we do on PsyOp Cinema is to look at cultural engineering, particularly looking at Hollywood as kind of a broad PsyOp in itself and just seeing what that opens up in terms of understanding the broader set of PsyOps that make up culture, espionage, connect to the occult, transhumanism, all these kind of things. And typically what we do is we take a particular director, go very deep into their background and just look at movie through movie, just like what is being actually said in these films, like what are their actual messages, what can we learn from the background of the director, the writer, all these things. And just connecting that to some broader research that Brett and I also do on, like I said, espionage, the occult, transhumanism, similar subjects. And recently what we've been doing is a lengthy series on the Joker, both the kind of general trickster archetype and how that relates to the Batman character. Specifically, we zeroed in first on the Joaquin Phoenix 2019 movie. And then that led us into a lot of things that we can bring up in relation to conspiracy theory, particularly, as you said, our analysis of chapter 27, this film starring Jared Leto as Mark David Chapman, because we found that that the Joker kind of archetype as it relates to these lineages, fiction and nonfiction, of the antisocial, rebellious male, both in terms of the Joker and all these other kind of fictional characters. We can look at even going back to, say, Travis Bickle or Holden Caulfield, and then also a bunch of, you could say, malcontent, violent men and different subtypes of that in actual history, especially relevantly MK Ultra assassins like Mark David Chapman or John Hinckley Jr. So that's kind of what we've been looking at recently. And so talking about conspiracy theories seemed like a great idea in light of all that.
Great. And Brett, would you like to add anything?
I would just add that, yeah, our interest in this film too relates to, Thomas mentioned that we look at, Hollywood as a PsyOp and as basically through the lens of cultural engineering. And specifically on the show, we kind of use this parallel or isomorphism between like micro MK Ultra mind control and the macro level multimedia mind control PsyOps and the post Phoenix program era, and not just as a metaphor, but I think there's a real structural analogy going on there, and that'll come up in this film where they're using mind control techniques on Jerry, and they're also like doing it to you at the same time at some level too. So that's really kind of one of the lodestars of PsyOp cinema, is looking at cinema as a form of mass mind control.
Interesting. Yeah. So this is kind of a play on that. So it starts out, this intro of Gibson, this is conspiracy theory, starts out with him like rambling like a talk soup of all the conspiracy theories ever. Mentions Rockefeller, fluoride, all these things. Oswald pops up, and so you kind of get that intro that this is where this film is going. But then he mentions George Bush New World Order speech. So some of these kind of like highlights of conspiracy-ana, if you would, like that kind of term, was right at the introduction. But you see that he's having these flashbacks right at the beginning, right? So it gives you kind of an insight that this guy is not, it's not a normie by any terms, right?
Yeah, and the beginning of a movie is very important. As Kubrick said, the first shot is the most important. That's not always true, but the beginning of the movie is very, very important for people like Richard Donner, especially, who are journeyman Hollywood blockbuster directors. They kind of know. They kind of know the language, and a lot is encapsulated in that beginning. So, like, even before he's spouting off like all of these kind of disorienting conspiracy theories, the Warner Brothers logo, you notice in this one, is an image of an image. So, like, it's tricking you right away. Like, you think that's just a typical corporate screen, but it's like a bus, that drives away, and it's in the cloud. So it's an immediate signal that something's going on here, sort of psyop. And I think it's a classic disinfo op. I think is what the movie is, and partly it's playing to what we're passing then as kind of stereotypes about conspiracy theorists and having fun with it. But I mean, there's a deliberate sort of scrambling of these explosive truths and these preposterous, falsehoods, and it's all put into the mouth of this unreliable narrator, this kooky and discredited messenger. And I mean, I think I don't want to get too far afield here. We'll analyze some of the specifics of the film, but I think what's also going on for people who are a little more discerning at the time, and they know they're watching it because they are into conspiracy and they know some of this stuff is true. I think it's leading them into kind of, what our friend Jason Horsey calls the second matrix. It's leading them out of one messed up worldview, normie worldview, into another scrambled worldview. And that's what this movie does to you too. It ultimately, the diegesis, the narrative, embraces the conspiracy theories of Jerry, but at the expense of a lot of reality and coherence about the real conspiracies that are behind it.
Yeah, I agree. Excellent points. I mean, it really does. It has that jumper. Donner. It was very successful. He had an odd, like you said, a journeyman career, but he also did The Omen, which was kind of played very straight, like scary. So he had done, and the Superman, he also said that was also a success. And this film had some controversy when it came out, probably deliberately created controversy about conspiracy thinking and things like that. And now today, I would think in this going back 25 years, so much of this has these ideas that may have not been cemented in the public mind, such as MK Ultra or some of these other things, are now just part of our factual basis of outlook in the U.S. So I would say back then it was right at kind of the beginning of internet culture. And now it's like we're kind of, our discussion is based on kind of middle stage internet informational culture, I would say, and looking back at conspiracy theory. But what do you think, Tom? What were your first impressions?
Well, my biggest impression of the movie, and this is to skip kind of toward the end and where it all goes, but I was just shocked by how sinister some of the messaging here seems to be so blatantly. So there's obviously like the second matrix kind of stuff that Brett was mentioning. I think that's very important, and we can maybe pick up on that because Brett and I have been talking recently about basically how conspiracy culture becomes dangerous to the regime when it starts to leave the second matrix. When it's in doing all the second matrix kind of Gnostic stuff, that it's all fun and games, kooky guys spouting kooky, fun, trippy, just ideas that don't really lead anywhere, then that's not really a threat. That just doesn't really go anywhere. But when it actually starts to cohere and actually come up with at kind of a paradigm level, consistent critique of power and what power and the kind of the goodness and reality that power is actually attacking, that's when it becomes dangerous. And so we can look at the evolution of something like Richard Linklater's Slacker, which is a movie that Brett is a big fan of, and he just had me watch recently, and to see this kind of early 90s, just slice of life in Austin kind of perspective on, look at all these interesting guys talking about these weird kooky ideas, to in conspiracy theory, all right, they're starting to take the idea of the social misfit conspiracy theorists more seriously, and then you get to the present day when it's like, oh my God, these incel conspiracy theorists are going to destroy the country. They're so evil. They're connected to fascism and all these things. And so you can see that kind of escalating moral panic when it comes to conspiracy theorizing. And the idea there is like, I found this one article on Decider or something like that from last year that was like Slacker 30 years in, and it was basically saying, oh, this stuff was so fun and innocent back then, but then once it became online conspiracy theorizing, all these sinister people started to take advantage of these conspiracy theorists and directed them into these evil ideologies. And there it's talking about like Alex Jones and all these other kind of boogeymen to the establishment. So that's one thing that really stood out to me is like, okay, Mel Gibson here is fun because he's just kind of a weirdo and he's talking about all these ideas kind of scattershot. But then really what I think, and I'm interested in Brett picking up on kind of what I said about Slacker and Linklater, but something I want to say from the outset is this is a horrifying movie because it's about an MK Ultra victim. Like he's named in the movie as it was specifically MK Ultra stuff that was done to him. The Patrick Stewart villain talks about being an MK Ultra doctor and all of this, finding his correct handlers. Like it's like, okay, the CIA was bad. It did these bad things with this rogue guy in the CIA. But this movie is all about Mel Gibson's character, Jerry, being recruited to work for this other intelligence agency that's unnamed. It's more powerful. It's this even more shadowy agency that watches all the other agencies. And they're the good guys. Like the movie ends with him working for them. And they're going to find all the other guys who are victims of the CIA MK stuff. And it's basically about Mel Gibson's character being recruited into the equivalent of Spectre. And he's watching the Julia Roberts character at the end of the movie, just like he was at the beginning. They're all singing the song together that he sings throughout the movie, Can't Take My Eyes Off of You, which he first sings when he's stalking Julia Roberts' character Alice at the beginning. And so just the fact that this movie just plays it so straight, plays it so light, that this traumatized, disturbed MK Ultra victim, he just needed to find the correct bosses. He just needed to find the right spy agency to work for, and he's a hero for doing that. It's just crazy to me.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. And it reminded me, like when I was watching it too, it kind of fit right into another movie that came out 1 year later, which is Enemy of the State. So you had that hyper paranoia, watching everything, being tracked when he buys. And this ties into your talk about, or your discussion, your guys' discussion about chapter 27. Like when he goes and buys Catcher in the Rye, he gets pinged on some computer program, rudimentary computer program or computer from 25 years ago, and then they go and find him at the bookstore, right? So maybe you guys can talk about how that theme of Catcher in the Rye pervades, and they mention names specifically in this film. They talk about Hinckley and Chapman. So it is interesting, that theme that was a part of this conspiracy theory.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as Thomas was saying, I mean, part of the agenda of this film is to kind of assimilate the conspiracy theorist with this outsider, weirdo, loner, I guess now incel type that has its roots in Taxi Driver and the figure of Travis Bickle, who allegedly inspires John Hinckley Jr., who's seen the movie like some 500 times, had to watch it in court, to attempt to assassinate Ronald Reagan. He was obsessed with Jodie Foster, and I won't unravel our research. Yeah, and this overlap. Chapman's
right,
obsession with.
Right, you're kind of coming in and out. It's that's what his occupation is. Mel Gibson's character is a taxi driver too, so you see that kind of overlap, right?
Yeah, there's several direct parallels with Taxi Driver. They're deliberately, but even like the drum that at the beginning, there's this like drum sequence, like that's deliberately out of Taxi Driver. There's several things that are directly invoking Taxi Driver. But here, it's like this is the beginning of sort of making this figure of the conspiracy theorist become Travis Bickle. That's why this is really important, because the conspiracy theorist is kind of the harmless, like the slacker, figure. He's the harmless kook. And notice how, it's when Jerry is dangerous as he gets over the target. And I think that's part of the lesson here, is that conspiracy theorists are dangerous when they're right. They're not dangerous when they're falling for the disinfo. And I think the movie's telling you, hey, just enjoy the PsyOp, fall for the disinfo. You can't figure it out. It's all just fun and games anyway. Just don't try to figure out what's going on here. It's all fantasy, go back to sleep, I think is essentially, what's going on. And this is a bit of a challenge, to do this in 97, because you think of like figures like the lone gunman in the X-Files, their strength kind of in some ways, they're these nerds that everybody thinks is harmless. That's how they sort of stay out of the way or something, but if you go back, though, there are already signs of overlap, between the conspiracy theorist and the dangerous outsider, lone wolf assassin patsy figure. I mean, Chapman was apparently a conspiracy theorist, and he, it gets really interesting because he was discussing the Kennedy assassination outside of the Dakota building where he supposedly killed Lennon with the doorman who is Jose Perdomo, who is almost certainly the Jose Perdomo who was the head of Unit 40, the hit squad that's involved probably in the Kennedy assassination and in Bay of Pigs. And, he's even identified in the article that identifies him, which was 6 years after the assassination. He's the only figure that's not identified, which is often a tell in journalism, or that someone's an intelligence agent when they're not identified or they're given an alias. But when he's finally identified, he's identified as an anti-Castro Cuban. So you have this person who is an associate of Frank Sturgis, and he was involved probably in Kennedy assassination, Bay of Pigs, and he's discussing the Kennedy assassination conspiracies with Chapman right here. So anyway, this is the kind of
this guy's a friend of E. Howard Hunt. This is guys like in that same group, Bay of Pigs, E. Howard Hunt, all that stuff. It's incredible, right. And he's suspected as the real trigger man, right?
Or he was there to handle Chapman and
sorry to interrupt, but just one more thing. The Lennon assassination was December 8th, 1980, and then just after that was Hinckley shooting Reagan March 30th, 81. So they're 4 months apart. Sorry.
And the Catcher in the Rye originally is what you're right. So the Catcher in the Rye binds these together as well, because Chapman was very obsessed internally. Catcher in the Rye was like reading it when he was arrested at the scene, was obsessed with it. That's what the movie Chapter 27 is kind of about. But then also Hinckley in his hotel room, they discovered a copy of The Catcher in the Rye after the police, when they raided his hotel room after the assassination attempt. And this comes up not just in these. It's in other cases as well. I mean, I just briefly mentioned the case of Robert John Bardo, who was actually writing letters to Chapman when he was in prison. And Bardo was obsessed with an actress, kind of like Hinckley obsessed with Jodie Foster. He was obsessed with an actress named Rebecca Schaefer, whom he killed. And he actually threw away a copy of The Catcher in the Rye as he was running away from the scene, as if it was evidence. And then he, in court, get this, he said the U2 song Exit, and people can check that out for themselves. It's very disturbing. The U2 song Exit, he said, was programmed, and they actually had to play it in court. He said it was making him have this ideation to commit these crimes. So again, this overlap between sort of micro mind control, the use of music programming like on Jerry, and then sort of like, what's this stuff doing to kids who are listening to it on headphones over and over again. And we get these characters like this Bobby Cremo guy, like this weird guy who went on a shooting spree in Chicago. Like, is he like literally a Jerry? Is he like a mind control MKulture project, or is he just MK'd by the MK culture?
Right. He definitely was kind of like that repository of all of this kind of conspiratoriana. Like, he had the smiley face on his outfits. He was repeating stuff that Manson said, like, there's no time like now, there's no past, there's no future. These are all like social control phrases that people use in that was in the Manson family. So Manson knew a lot of that stuff. He was clear on Scientology, which is just like mind control, ne plus ultra, off the charts. So you're right. It's within the kind of psychosphere now, and Cremo was definitely picking it up.
Yeah, and with Cremo, I mean, just some of the specificity to what he was into, it's really stunning. I mean, like on Genius, the lyric interpretation site, most of his comments he left on there were pretty generic and uninteresting. But in one, he talked specifically about Crowley, specifically about the Eon of Horus, Eon of the Child kind of stuff. So like some of the most important concepts, I think, that are ultimately behind all of this cultural engineering stuff. Cremo knew about all of that. I mean, some of the weird symbols he put up, just like the one that Cremo had associated with his Awake the Rapper persona looked kind of like the Process Church stuff. And then when John Hinckley Jr., like now that he's he's a musician trying to promote himself, doing all this weird throwback 60s counterculture, psychedelic looking cult kind of stuff, that he puts out this, that Hinckley puts out the symbol just the other week that immediately reminded me of the Cremo one and all of that.
This is a screenshot from your feed on Twitter. So go get on the Twitter and check out PsyOp Cinema. But I took a snapshot of that, so there it is, right? That's the symbol you're talking about.
Yeah, that's the Hinckley one. First thing I thought of was it was, and I had another tweet where I compared them, but was the Cremo one, which made me think of Process stuff. So all of this, and this really does connect everything we're talking about to our Joker series, in as much as the 2019 movie, which I think is very important for reasons that Brett and I talk about in depth in a few different episodes that we've done recently, largely inspired by Taxi Driver and King of Comedy as well, but Travis Bickle and Taxi Driver loom really large over the 2019 Joker film, and that kind of turned out to be the strange attractor for all this research about all this MK Ultra assassin kind of stuff. And Brett started looking really, really deeply into Mark David Chapman and Lennon's murder and all of that. And we watched Chapter 27, which stars Jared Leto, who would later go on to, of course, play the Joker. So all of these things kind of seem to be in the same lineage, very, very empirically speaking.
Yeah, and I noted you remarked that he was in Fight Club and all the smiley face imageries through that movie, the book, and all the way up to the president. I mean, we were talking about him wearing the smiley face. This is Cremo with that symbol you're talking about, and then the smiley face icon, and then the Oswald slain in jail. I mean, it's incredible, like what this guy was just absorbing. I mean, it's off the charts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one would almost think that he had to directly have a handler, but if you're aware of just how much of this stuff is in culture, just how ingrained these psyops are, like if someone wants to go for it, they can MK themselves really hard, and that's why I suspect was going on there.
I mean, didn't they find that the one guy, the shooter that was around the time of Cremo, he was the one who I think shot in Rochester or somewhere upstate New York, that he had an FBI handler or something? He had some kind of so Cremo might have had one. I just don't know if that would
Cremo refers to one, but we don't even know if that's just delusion or not. But he literally refers to one in a video.
There's a picture of him with an FBI hat. Like he's joking around with these things. He's definitely goofing around. Like I have a picture of him. Let's see. I mean, it's off the charts. And he dressed as a woman. I mean, just kind of weird cross. I mean, he is something else. This is him with an FBI hat. I don't know if you guys have seen this.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't joke around with him like that, but he didn't have that problem. He was dressed as a hitman. He had the smiley face in one of his videos. He was picking all kinds of stuff up. But yeah, so that all Leto, Chapman, these guys all and Hinckley's out and still doing music. I mean, he is a very strange guy. But Leto, I mean, I mean, there's the smiley face in the Suicide Squad poster. It's just everywhere and all of his stuff. But it goes back to this kind of movie like The Catcher in the Rye. What is in The Catcher in the Rye? Why do you think they use that? I think you guys mentioned Catcher in the Rye and The Wizard of Oz as kind of like programming books that have been used. Why do you think that those are being used? Do you guys have any ideas on that?
Well, I mean, The Catcher in the Rye is, there's a book on it's called the Neurolinguistic Thesis on Linguistic Triggering. I mean, part of the argument for, and I don't know, but I mean, part of the argument for, and it's not like something has to be made specifically. I mean, I don't think The Wizard of Oz was made for MK Ultra because it was MK Ultra, specifically about The Catcher in the Rye, Salinger was actually in intelligence in World War II and was in a pretty secretive, he was in the Ritchie, was in a pretty secretive unit that has a lot of interesting luminaries if you look them up. And was involved in, like interrogations that involved torture, and that he wrote the book mostly in this environment. So, I mean, that's one of the pieces of information, of evidence, around that. With the wizard. Okay, so with the Wizard of Oz and certain other mind control or monarch tropes is like, I mean, a lot of your audience is probably aware of Fritz Meyer's book on the Illuminati formula to create undetectable mind control slave. And I mean, whatever you think the veracity of it is, he's describing a pattern of symbology, and he's describing a kind of religion of sorts that's used in this mind control cult that runs the world. And whether you believe that or not, though, you can see the same that pattern of symbols specifically associated with mind control themes in very particular movies. I have a whole series devoted to it for premium listeners. I mean, we do certain. I mean, this kind of is a Monarch film. It doesn't have some of the telltale symbols of Monarch, but it just is in the open. This movie about MK Ultra and the use of, also, he's flashing on cartoons and music and so on when he's having this episode when Dr. Jonas, played by Patrick Stewart, is torturing him. And this indicates that this stuff was used in his program. The music thing is just like very obvious that's his program. He said it's the music, he's following the music in his head is what leads him to where the climactic scene occurs at Alice's family estate. But film, and the film is a kind of method of torture. Too. I mean, the use of these the flashing lights and stuff. But yeah, go ahead, Thomas. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say the flashing light kind of MK Ultra torture sequence. It's fascinating because that's the most intense the movie gets by far, and it's genuinely somewhat unsettling to watch. But then the rest of it, it's an enjoyable film in some ways. But the really weird thing about it is just the tone is so light for most of it. There's so many things that are played for laughs that it's constantly hinting wanting to take what happened to Jerry more seriously, but it never quite goes there. And it seems it's this weird tonal discrepancy at the very heart of the movie, and that bleeds into like how his relationship with the character Alice, the Julia Roberts character, plays out, where it always seems that both actors are good in their own right, but their dynamic always seems a little bit forced in here for some, like even when he tells her, basically he lets slip that he's been more or less stalking her, just like watching her from the street when she's alone in her apartment. It's really creepy stuff. Like even that, like her telling him to leave is mostly played fairly lightly. So there's this weird thing where her, and so again the name Alice there. So you have like these things like Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland that come up over and over again in Monarch kind of programming. And so you were asking about Catcher in the Rye and Wizard of Oz, and there's all kinds of stuff there. But just like Catcher in the Rye, just some of the stuff there, like in that novel, makes it make sense as a template for like all these other ideas, like in fiction and nonfiction, of men who quite can't fit into society, and so like go into these more destructive patterns, like with Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland. The idea of portals to other worlds, portals to the imagination that are really portals to hell or portals to like absolute dissociation in Monarch stuff. Just make those things like I think rife for basically being co-opted and used by Monarch style programmers. But so her name is Alice, which is a giveaway that there's something weird happening there. And she's almost not even just like a really convincing character. Like she's humoring Jerry that he's weird, he's stalkerish, he's and all these things. But she's basically there as a source of feminine validation for him. At the end, he doesn't even end up in a relationship with her. He's just watching her, like he is at the beginning of the movie. But she's kind of guided him into being recruited by the Spectre organization. And I think that this, like Brett was talking about the music, the music guides him to this particular important site of basically all of his MK stuff. That at the beginning of the movie, he realizes that she's listening to this particular song, "Can't Take My Eyes Off of You," while she's alone on her treadmill in her apartment. He sings along with that. And then at the end, she hears him singing that song and is able to find him in a moment of distress later in the movie. So it keeps coming up. And then at the end, when he's watching her again, and he's basically faked his death, gives her a hint that he's still alive. It's this very supposed to be touching moment, and all these things, happy ending. But he's in a car with his new handlers. This one guy who is supposedly in the FBI, but then actually is in this basically Spectre organization, and this other guy who is this very small minor character who's just working at a newsstand. He interacts with in the first few minutes of the movie. Oh, it turns out this guy was part of this Spectre organization all along too. And that guy Flip, that character, says to him, "Well, I guess nothing was what it seemed." And he goes, "Yeah, except for her," Mel Gibson's character says, which I think is a dead giveaway. So both that line is basically telling you it's tipping the hand of the movie, like, don't believe anything you've seen. This has all just been misdirection, disinfo. But when he says, except for her, I think that tells us that she's the biggest piece of misdirection in the movie. I mean, just like think about like all the double meanings with Can't Take My Eyes Off of You. There's the obvious surveillance stuff, and now he's working for the spy agency, so he's going to be surveilling people. She knows he's watching him, and she's okay with that. So basically, be surveilled, surveil other people, participate in the mission, and also just obsessed with Julia Roberts. Like focus on this Hollywood beautiful actress. Let that hypnotize you. Can't take my eyes off you. Can't look away from the screen. Basically, it's saying. So there's all these double meanings there. Look at the beautiful actress. Look at the screen. Be okay with being watched. Watch other people. All of that there from the beginning and end of the movie. That symmetry, I think, is very disturbing.
Yeah, no, those are important themes of that whole film, all the way at the end. So they're singing it, goofily singing it out like a band, that same song as it ends in the car, right? With the new Spectre organization or whatever. And it was also interesting. It takes place in New York. There's a lot of important sites. There's a very large pan shot of the Twin Towers there in 1997. That's quite interesting. There were weird things. Like, I think when he was originally captured, he went into the Orpheum Theater, and I got the feeling they were reenacting the scene of the Oswald capture during the JFK. I think that was actually intentional by Hagelin. And there was also some other odd spots, like the New World Cap coffee. So they had, and with the triangle. So they were definitely tinkering around with the locations and locales. I got that sense. And airmen. So yeah, go ahead, please go.
Yeah, absolutely. That was Oswald going into the theater. Going to the bookstore is Chapman, because Chapman going to a bookstore and buying. You have to keep buying copies of The Catcher in the Rye if you're upset. You just kind of keep the few that you have. But that was Chapman, and there's all these again references to fictional and non-fictional examples of this archetype, and that's part of the point, right? To blend fiction and reality. But as for the Spectre thing, so. Donner's background and some other projects I've worked on are kind of instructive there. So Donner's history of cooperating with the military and the CIA goes back actually to his debut film X-15 from 1960 something. I mean, it was, which was revealed in these recently declassified files. You can read like Tom Secker's book on this. To have been one of really hundreds of productions, thousands if you include television, that were made under the supervision of the Pentagon. Or the intelligence agency. So Donner himself, it's weirdly, he joined the Navy as part of the special 1-year enlistment program in the 50s. Shortly before that, worked as an aerial photographer, and he also goes on to direct episodes of the CIA connected TV show The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And so when Lowry, the black guy, the good intelligence agent, makes that comment, if the intelligence in the intelligence family, we're the uncle nobody talks about. Okay, so that's a reference to The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and U.N.C.L.E. is basically Spectre, like it's the James, like in Spectre to James Bond, U.N.C.L.E. is to that show, which is this sort of globalist. But anyway, so that's the direct Spectre. I mean, the producer Ron Silver. I mean, he has a history of DoD, CIA supported projects, executive decision. Brian Hagelin, who you mentioned, he wrote Man on Fire, the Tony Scott movie in 2004, which is war on terror, torture propaganda, and so a lot of CIA type of connections to this movie.
And I also got to start with Nightmare on Elm Street, right, Brett? With one of the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels, which you've covered a lot of your Monarch stuff.
Yeah. So he actually got his start with a lot of us people got their start in Nightmare on Elm Street, which you can listen to a couple of my Monarch episodes 6 and 7 where I get deep into the Nightmare on Elm Street PsyOp. But I want to say too, this character, part of what's playing into the character of Jerry is other Richard Donner, Mel Gibson collaborations, predominantly the Lethal Weapon movies, and really this. And audiences, would know that at the time. I mean, they kind of knew what to expect. Mel always played these kind of zany, loose cannon, charming, heroic characters, and this is not exactly the same as Mel's character, and type, but it's definitely a play on it. And in Lethal Weapon, notably, Mel is a Vietnam vet. I don't know if he is in Conspiracy Theory. They make it kind of ambiguous, but in the Lethal Weapons, he is, and it said that he was. The reason that he's so messed up is because he was in special forces in Vietnam, and he was in, quote, the Phoenix Project, by which I think they mean the Phoenix Program. And the first Lethal Weapon's really I mean, there's a lot of crossover stuff. I mean, Warner likes to refer back to his own movies within them. I won't give you all the examples of it. So it really is important kind of look at the Lethal Weapon Mel to understand this character a little bit and look at the conspiracies. And I just want to give just one brief example, because in the first Lethal Weapon, like one of the leading goons and the Gary Busey character, who's a super assassin who's like impervious to fame, was another Phoenix Program super assassin, and he's in this unit called Shadow Company, which is part of, this is in the movie, this is in Lethal Weapon, is part of, quote, Air America, which in the movie is said to be the CIA front that's running the whole Vietnam War out of Laos and involved in the heroin trade. And, you know, many of these details are real, and not all of them, but many of them are real, but they're partly depicted in the film Air America, starring Mel Gibson, which came out in 1990, you know, just a few years before Lethal Weapon. So there's all of this inside baseball recursive feedback loop stuff going on here with Donner and Mel. Yeah.
Yeah, with Donner, I mean, some of his background, I would love to think more about The Omen at some point, because I think some of the stuff about the other super iconic satanic movies that era are very well, you know, the Exorcist and, you know, Rosemary's Baby. Some of the more sus stuff about them are kind of out there, but I would love to think more about The Omen, because I used to really like that film, and it's definitely it's got some pretty incoherent theology in the background. And I would love to think about some of what Donner was doing there, and then, you know, doing Superman, of course. I mean, I really like Superman as a character. I used to be really into superhero stuff. Obviously, very not much anymore. I think it's just a huge vector for human potential and really crazy transhumanist, superhumanist stuff, even occult stuff to seep into the mainstream. But Superman as a character, this kind of ultimately wholesome superhero, this kind of the poison pill that let all the crap in. And so, like, a bunch of important stuff with Donner there, and Lethal Weapon, like Brett mentioned, and then yeah, with Joel Silver, Joel Silver is the producer, and he just seems to be a very sketchy guy. And, you know, in general, some people might remember the Tom Cruise character in Tropic Thunder. That was apparently a parody of Joel Silver. Donner broke with him at some point, I think around 2000 or something like that, a little bit after this movie came out, and just said that Silver's kind of a bad guy he doesn't really want to be associated with anymore. He's been and there was an incident where one of Silver's assistants drowned in a lagoon, and the family sued him, I think unsuccessfully, about that. And then I also I saw that this was interesting to me, that Silver and Donner were both producers for the Tales from the Crypt show, and also one of the other producers there is David Giler, who a producer of Alien 3 and The Parallax View. So fun fact there. But the only thing that Silver has ever directed, he's very prolific as a producer, as Brett mentioned, but the only thing he ever directed is just one episode of Tales from the Crypt called Split Personality, where it's Joe Pesci as a con man conning these two twins who he wants to marry both of them to get their entire fortune or something like that. So he pretends to be he invents a fake persona where he's his own twin brother, and then marries him. It turns out that they had killed their father, and then they kill him at the end. They chainsaw him in half or something really gruesome like that. But just a split personality, the schizo themes, twin imagery, very, very important. Not just for this whole kind of MK Ultra Joker stream that we're thinking about, but to basically elite esotericism in general. So, and then apparently in that episode, which I haven't seen, I've just read about, but the photo that you see that is the twins' father is of Richard Donner in there. So just a nod probably to him as producer, but still very creepy, all that going on. So very, very suspect credits behind this movie. All that to say.
Wow, and it's interesting that the drowning happened, and there was an interesting line in this film, Conspiracy Theory, where Mel Gibson's character shows his knowledge and says, did the guy drown? Did he have chlorinated water in his lungs? And it reminded me of the entire kind of SFK phenomenon, is that they had one test, they found that the water was different in one of the victim's lungs. So I kind of was like, oh wow, they were thinking about stuff like that back in '97 or putting it in there. And also, they kind of had the whole theme in our culture of like the suicided deaths, right? So you hear about the Clinton death list. They had five. The conspiracy theory is also the name of a newsletter in the movie that Mel Gibson is secretly, paranoidically handing out or sending out through the mail. And he only had 5 subscribers. And then at a certain point, Julia Roberts' character finds out 4 or 5 of them died in the last 24 hours. So you see that kind of theme that's also around in kind of conspiracy culture now of like who got suicided. Like, so I thought that was interesting to have that included in the film.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I wondered if you were going to mention the drowning thing. I thought of that when during that line in this film. But yeah, something that's interesting here is just some of the comments in the movie about conspiracy culture, because I think when Hollywood tries to decohere people by putting into this second matrix Gnostic mode of just kind of reality as endless illusion, a hall of mirrors that you'll never get out of, and tries to leverage conspiracy analysis toward that end. One thing it tries to do is just really just like put people in all these loops and loops and loops of analysis of conspiracy culture itself, this kind of meta-analysis. And the movie does that a little bit, where it's where even though the movie itself is disinfo, there's you have the Mel Gibson character Jerry like talking about how when HW said New World Order, he was doing that specifically to trigger conspiracy theorists and get them to spin their wheels. So like the movie is kind of aware of that conspiracy theorists kind of comment on their own culture that way. So the character is even looking for ways that conspiracy theorists can be triggered. There's the Oliver Stone line, which is interesting, when one of the things he says is that basically if Oliver Stone wasn't a disinfo agent, he wouldn't be alive. He wouldn't be allowed to have that kind of platform. And so maybe Brett can comment more on this, but that was curious to me because on one hand, the movie's giving itself away purposefully. It's kind of a taunt there, basically telling you that, yeah, if this movie was actually not disinfo, if this was actually revealing conspiracies, it wouldn't have be in this really like held up place in Hollywood. And it also might be poisoning the well a little bit, just because I don't know exactly what to make of Oliver Stone. Brett and I are going to do a full series on him at some point. We have a lengthy list of directors to cover, of course, but at least there was something that the movie could be doing there is just like trying to say, oh, don't pay attention to the JFK film or anything that might get you interested in. That's just disinfo. Kind of like the fact. Oh, and I thought this earlier when we were talking about Hinckley, that the Patrick Stewart villain says to the Alice character, like, "Oh, that wasn't us," about Hinckley shooting Reagan. So it's just a very, very limited hangout stuff where it's saying like, oh yeah, MK Ultra is real. In fact, it never ended, but it was just this rogue guy doing it. And in fact, it did end when Hinckley shot Reagan, because that wasn't the CIA. That was just the technology got out. Now there's these private interests doing MK stuff, so they can't do that anymore. So it's played as a joke, but I think that that stuff with like the Oliver Stone line, or especially with that wasn't us line about Hinckley, are basically just really strong diversions.
Yeah, no, well said. And there were other things in there. Oh, it stopped in 1973. So they're putting that right out there, like he's telling you the truth. When they're clearly using MK Ultra techniques at Guantanamo, and some of these other places, like the sensory deprivation that they mention in this film too. But I can give you a head start on Oliver Stone. I think JFK was obviously telling the truth as much as they could about the JFK assassination, but Stone went to school at Yale. He knows occult numerology, and I include a segment about his films in my documentary Occult Hollywood version 2, because it's there. If you watch, you can see the smiley faces in Natural Born Killers. It starts off with Sunset Strip 77, so he throws in a 77, and right before the scenes of the falling of the Twin Towers, he actually includes the numerology involved in the Twin Towers destruction in 9/11 in his film. I think it was 9/11 too. I can't remember the title of it, but also he knew a lot. He put stuff into the Doors, so he knows a lot of the esotericism. There's no question about it.
Well, if you surprise me, have you seen Any Given Sunday, William? His
no,
NFL. Oh, see, I mean, you should watch that one. That one is actually the most obvious surprise. He'd hide it. He'd hide it in the most unlikely place. But I mean, yeah, like even the team at the end they're playing is the all-seeing eye team, and the guy's eye comes out during the game. I mean, the 666 huddle signal. I mean, it's
wow.
like some
It's
kind
that
of joke.
obvious.
Yeah. It's like that. It's like that obvious in it. But Stone's his first credit. It's a producer credit. He gets 73. I mean, he has like some like like short film or something before that, but it's his only producer credit until like his own movie Salvador in '86, and it's for this mind control film called Sugar Cookies. With the director Ted Gershwin is really like wound up in a lot of pushing these kind of Illuminati mind control themes in the underground in the '80s. It's so his start is very sus. He was in the B world, doing horror movies until he started doing these more political movies. So he had this political awakening. Yeah, but there's a lot of there's a lot of things that are very suspicious. But I think I think Thomas might be right too. There's a poisoning of the well because how much can Oliver Stone say? Obviously, he's revealing some things. I wonder do you guys want to look at some of the conspiracy theories that Jerry specifically mentions?
Yes, let's do
it. In the movie, he says that the Grateful Dead are all British spies, right? This is one of them that probably the normal audience of this movie is not apt to take very seriously, especially in this sort of like conspiracy soup that they're swimming in with Jerry. He's just a conspiracy a minute, but this is partly true. I mean, I think it's totally true that the Grateful Dead were intelligence and that they were spies. I think that is like proven. I don't know if they're British spies, but it is a fact that Alan Trist, this social engineer for the Tavistock incident, he became the shadow manager of the Grateful Dead. And Eric Trist, his father, is one of the, look it up, I mean, he's one of the founders of Tavistock. He's arguably the creator of political correctness, by the way. I mean, so many things people don't know, teenagers and political correctness and all the stuff that comes out of Tavistock. But, Jerry also claimed, Jerry in the movie claims that Jerry Garcia is not really dead. That's just what they want you to think. Now, that's interesting because that's sort of like what this movie does, actually, in a more intricate way than people might appreciate when they just think Jerry's spouting these conspiracies. But he's actually sort of branching off from one conspiracy that I think has a lot of roots and truth to another one that's a lot murkier to me, and that's actually one that's still in the underground. It's the like, are celebrities faking deaths? Are public figures, faking their own deaths? I've even come across one of these with John Lennon that's in a movie, or that's memorialized in a movie called Let Him Be, this obscure Canadian movie which is playing a bunch of games with the audience and trying to make you believe that John Lennon is people know the Elvis one, right? That's kind of the stand-in for all of this. But the faking. So Jerry fakes his death at the end, right? Though Jerry is grave, he fakes his death, and you see this in movies, in these noir type of movies. It's common that the operatives will fake their deaths. I'm thinking like La Femme Nikita, one that we've done with Jay Dyer, just to mention one off the top of my head. Interesting too, it occurs to me too, Perdomo, the Jose Perdomo, the doorman, the CIA doorman, the Chapman case I mentioned, there's a fake death involved in his case too, because Frank Sturgis told these journalists that Perdomo had died in '74. That's what was printed in a book that happened to be published in '81, right around the time of the Reagan assassination attempt. So that's kind of a theme that is murky, but is related. Let's see, Jerry, here's a predictive programming one, sort of, maybe. I mean, Jerry tries to warn Alice that NASA is plotting to assassinate the president by creating an earthquake in Turkey. And this actually occurs in the movie. That's important. Are we just going into Jerry's psychosis, sort of like Travis Bickle and Taxi Driver? But all Jerry's conspiracies are coming true. And in the movie, the earthquake is supposedly happens and is to kill the president, and then Clinton actually visits Turkey in '99, like right. He happened to be in Eastern Europe. I couldn't figure out whether he was supposed to be there or not, but anyway, that's been mentioned before online.
Yeah, some of the other ones he mentioned was George, like I mentioned earlier, George Bush. He was talking about the festering scab at the Vatican to nuns, and he's a very rigid. It's actually probably something that he really believed, because he's a very rigid conservative Catholic, is my understanding. So that kind of made me kind of smile when he said that opening line. And if people haven't seen the movie, the opening is him driving his taxi cab just babbling to all of his passengers about his different conspiracies, some of which Brett mentioned. And he also threw in militia groups. Oswald was a patsy, right? And he actually mentioned that Oswald said, "I'm just a patsy." But the dead, too, have weird occult symbology, right? They're Grateful Dead. There's a brain with a lightning bolt through it, which is totally occult. But I don't know what their lyrics were, but their first name was the Warlocks, which is also disturbing, before they got repackaged as the Grateful Dead. And they really popularized the drug culture too, right? That was part of probably their job, was normalizing just tons of psychedelic drugs, including acid. I know people who followed the Dead, and their personalities were not the same after their experiences. I grew up in Northern California, so I was very familiar with kind of Dead being around. Is there anything else you guys like to add? Let's talk about Leto and the chapter 27, the Dakota. Really interesting stuff, because the Dakota is kind of like haunted in itself, right?
Yeah, very much so. Brett, you want to take this one?
Sure, yeah. I mean, in chapter 27, the movie references the so-called Rosemary's Baby curse. I don't know if you're aware of like all these terrible things that happened to people who worked on the movie. But in chapter 27, he suddenly recognizes, Chapman suddenly recognizes that there's some like odd force of synchronicity going on, because it is it's oh, sorry. I interrupted here just a second. Thomas, do you want to take this one over? I gotta step out of the room for just a second. Sorry, a second.
Yeah, sure thing. So basically there's this moment in chapter 27 that in our discussion of them, people can listen to the PsyOp Cinema episodes. We have 2 of them on chapter 27 that we think of. It's kind of synchronicity as monarch mind control trigger, where it's like Brett was saying, it's Chapman in the movie basically realizing like all these connections, between the Dakota, Rosemary's Baby, connections of connections to Manson, and all basically all these connections between Manson, Polanski, Lenin, all of these things, and then he basically realized that with all these coincidences, that's why he's going to kill Lenin. He gets the resolve to do that, basically, because he feels like he's being driven by these forces of history. And so there are real synchronicities, of course, but a lot of these things are basically just because these things are all coming from the same place. They're all involved in the same, ultimately, satanic superculture. And so I don't have the exact line in front of me in the movie just to remember how the Leto performance as Chapman lines up all those details, but basically it's all those basically historical forces coming together. It's a creepy sequence, not nearly as creepy as at the very end of chapter 27 when Leto looks into the camera and goes, "Now I'm talking to you," and it's just like, oh, it's really disturbing. And people can, if they're interested in Leto stuff, they can listen to an episode that we're going to have on our show next week, where Brett and I have an hour and a half of material just on 30 Seconds to Mars and their whole yes, it's a cult slogan that's been around for like at least 15 years, and just like the how openly satanic so much of their imagery and their merchandise is and stuff like that. So we'll be getting deep into Leto. Maybe we could talk about that in the future.
I'd love to.
Yeah, that'd be great. And a few other notes I have just on conspiracy theory. So like one of the things that Jerry says is that he gives like this really flimsy definition of, oh, who are they? He's like, oh, they, basically a very normie caricature of conspiracy theories. He's like, oh, of course they're not provable. If this was provable, they would have done something wrong. But all this basically stuff that is not actually how any skilled cultural engineering analyst would look at these things. But then he also says about there's 2 groups. One of them is the basically the wealthy families, and the other is the military-industrial complex, and they're at war with each other, but they're really not. And that's interesting because there's actually some efficacy, I think, to the idea of warring factions among the elites. Certainly, there's many factions in actuality, but the idea of there being two primary camps, and we can think of Yankee Cowboy War stuff or just some other things. It's ideas that Brett and I bounce around a lot. But of course, that's not the actual distinction. I mean, just anything from like just basic stuff like the Rockefellers' connection to Allen Dulles and stuff like that shows that no, it's not. That's not the wealthy families and military-industrial complex are not the central division. It's just more conspiracy soup stuff there, but kind of interesting because it's reflecting at something that could be real in a different sense. So that's one other thing I thought of.
One interesting thing about the Dakota that people sometimes missed out is that Lennon, the Beatles were talking about, like I think their last interview with Playboy was the whole purpose of the Beatle was do what thou will. I mean, he literally like quotes Crowley before he died, within a month before his death. And his wife was a full-on occultist. They were doing occult rituals involving like cow tongues and weird stuff. Like they were involved in heavy-duty stuff. And his wife, the band Wife from Hell, she timed her pregnancy to give birth to their son Sean on a specific numerological date of importance. So Sean Lennon is kind of like a magical child.
Wow. Yeah, that idea of the divine child, the Crowley moon child kind of idea, it's so important to all this. Oh, and I have the line in front of me now. I want to get this right to the scene from chapter 27. So basically, with the Dakota stuff, so Leto S. Chapman just goes, helter skelter. John Lennon lives in a building where a film about Satan coming to Earth, where a director's wife and child were killed because of a song that John Lennon, oh my God, this is not a coincidence. Today is the day. Today is the day. No coincidence. So basically, Haunting of Dakota stuff, and triggering Chapman. So that's the line.
That's it. Yeah, he's being killed. Like Lennon's being killed by his own music, like so to speak.
Right. And then you mentioned that Manson thought the White Album was for him. Like that. So you see these these killers being influenced by their music, thinking it's like has some kind of religious importance or impetus. Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, and there is numerological stuff in this movie. Jerry lives in apartment 11, and of course, like the hospital room number 322 is obviously Skull and Bones Society, which actually gets referenced a bunch of ways. There's the billionaire that's killed that they killed is named Harriman. Which I think is a clear reference to E.H. and Averill, who were big Skull and Bonesers. Prescott and Herbert Walker's Union Banking Company was just part of the Harriman Consortium through Fritz Thyssen, and so many of the Bush conspiracy people will know. But I think Alice is Alice in Wonderland, but I think her last name Sutton is probably a reference to Anthony C. Sutton, the historian who wrote one of the standard texts on Skull and Bones, America's Secret Establishment, an Introduction to the Order of Skull and Bones in 1983. And with regard to the group one versus group B, Mary's deep politics, kind of who they are, what's going on behind the scenes. Sutton wrote his this so-called Wall Street trilogy in the 70s about how the Soviet Union is basically their whole infrastructure and economy was built by U.S. tax dollars. So again, behind the scenes, there's a harmony that is not that's not seen sort of in the outer politics. Also notice that like Dr. Jonas is like his front, because he's fronting as this guy named Finch. His office is the Global Fund for Acquisitions and Mergers. Right. I mean, is the CIA a front for this, or is this a front for the CIA? But I mean, it's all the banks, it's the globalists, it's the Atlantis.
Right. And he has the Harvard ring, right?
Harvard ring, right? Harvard ring, just a little off of Yale, but Harvard, of course, gives you the MK Ultra connection.
Right, there it goes. And she tells him, she says, I didn't know the CIA had psychiatrists. So she's totally out of the loop.
Right. And with his ring, also the truth shall make you free line, which I get a direct reference there to Allen Dulles, largely responsible for MK Ultra, of course, wanting to have that exact phrase from the gospel just carved into the wall at CIA headquarters. So, which is, I think, very creepy.
Right. Wow, that's true. Wow. Yeah, I mean, they did a pretty decent job. I mean, they put stuff in there. Heggelund, got a lot of little tidbits, but they didn't go too deep of handling the real puppeteers, right? So they just kind of got the the pieces, the kernels of truth that are on the ground, but didn't really go, this is it, this is what they're doing.
Oh yeah, it's I think a much more damning here than in Parallax View, because in Parallax View we were very largely positive about when we discussed it on our show when you came on the first time. But we were saying like, oh, some of the lines can be kind of interpreted there as a limited hangout to think, oh, rogue faction, like private division, like things like that, rather than like getting at the full rot of the system. Whereas here is very, very explicit that like, oh, this is a bad apple, and in fact, not only is it just a bad apple, but there's active white hats in place that are taking care of this right now. So just gives you just enough, like the littlest piece of truth, like, oh, MK Ultra is real, and it kept going, like, yeah, of course, and then just immediately just like smothers that in lies. So it's pretty sophisticated as an op, I think.
And they also use that one term they use in Hollywood, gravy, right? So the shot that was going to be applied into Mel Gibson, they call gravy, and I've heard that in other contexts. But it's kind of like the gravy is like, it's like an urban dictionary term for like all the money and sex put together. Have you ever heard that term used outside of just its normal parlance of like gravy on mashed potatoes or something?
I can't say that I have. No.
Yeah, no, keep an eye out for that, because I've heard it in another show. There was this show, it was like The Lonely Housewives or something. They had a character named Crowley, and they used this term gravy all the time, but it's a much more, it has rich dual or triple meanings. But I thought that was interesting that they actually used that for the substance in the shot that they were giving to Gibson, right, which also was reminiscent of A Clockwork Orange, right?
Yeah,
so
very, very
the Ludovic message, Alex DeLarge, taped his eyes open all the way. I think it's pretty obvious.
The gravy is in that cartoon too, in that that 1951 cartoon. So by the way, Brian, I just want to make a footnote. Brian Heglin wrote the Skulls, the Skull and Bones movie, which weirdly comes out in 2000, right? Just when Bush comes to office, and 4 years before we have the Skull and Bones presidential election of 2004, which was also a phony election to a great degree in Ohio. But so a lot of these connections.
2000 was phony. Did you ever hear Hunter S. Thompson's analysis of the 2000 election?
I probably did at the time. Okay, but I was saying 2004, I think is
right. 2004 was fake too, but 2000, his analysis was that everything, the Chads and the battle between Gore Bush, that it was all staged, so that all of that, consternation and everything that went down in Florida, he said it was all staged. He said,
he might know. I mean, he was a Bohemian Grover who's been accused fairly credibly of doing some pretty bad things.
Yeah, no doubt.
A few other quick notes that I had that I want to get out about the movie. So like the serial killer line is interesting because it's just kind of unnecessary. It's when Jerry is talking about, assassins always have 3 names. And he makes that point by saying he names off famous serial killers that say they only have 2 names. But he really didn't need to say that at all, just to make the point about the assassin. So it's just kind of like almost like a subtle reference, like because he never goes into like serial killer conspiracy stuff, but kind of a slight hint toward like PTK style stuff there with that line that didn't really need to be.
I thought the same thing. Came to my mind. Wow.
So that was interesting. We've talked about the cartoon thing a little bit, but that did really jump out at me in the MK torture scene, the cartoon imagery, just because of we've thought a lot about the that weird advertisement for like Army psychological operations group stuff that came out earlier this year that had some like creepy cartoons at the beginning. I think some of the same cartoons that were actually used in one of the super suspect Bring Me the Horizon videos that we analyzed when we were on here last time.
Right.
So
I forgot that one. This is our 4th show, so that was our 3rd show. So I had forgotten that at the intro. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. One thing about the movie that I wasn't quite able to figure out, just like I said, there's these weird sticking points about the Jerry character that don't quite make sense, and I think give away what's kind of wrong with the movie and why it's kind of sinister. But there's one thing that I wasn't able to figure out is that he's only portrayed as kind of psychologically perceptive in a few cases, like where he's he's supposed to be like, okay, he's this kind of maniac, paranoid, socially inept guy who's right about these certain things. But he's got these few lines about Alice and her trauma and how she blames herself for her father's death. And he's just kind of, and when he says it, the movie is obviously trying to portray that as, oh, he's right, but he's just like overstepping boundaries by talking about that. But he's being perceptive about what's driving the Alice character, Julia Roberts' character, psychologically. But that's the only. But there's like 3 lines where that's obviously what's going on, and then nothing else in the movie suggests that Jerry is a psychologically perceptive guy at all. And I wasn't able to quite fit that into my overall picture of like what the movie is doing with the Jerry character. I didn't know if it's that maybe it's just his own fixation on her father's death. It's part of his own forgotten backstory. But Brett, especially, I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on what they were doing with those lines?
Say that again. Sorry, I'm a little bit distracted with what's happening with my kids over here, but I'm trying. Go ahead. What was that again?
That's just basically the few lines in the movie where it's trying to say about where it's trying to make it obvious that Jerry understands what's going on with Alice psychologically even better than she does with regard to her blaming herself for her father's death. It's just like these few lines where it's obviously trying to say, oh, Jerry's very psychologically perceptive here, and then nothing else, and none of his other lines, no other scene in the movie suggests that this is a psychologically perceptive character. So I'm just curious what you thought was going on there. I wasn't able to quite figure that out.
Yeah, no, that's a good. I mean, that's a good point, right? Are they signaling something he has like some kind of emotional intelligence? But yeah, he's just basically just a paranoiac.
Right. It was out of place. There were no other lines that suggested emotional intelligence. So anyway, that just whenever there's something like that I can't quite integrate into my overall assessment of what is the movie trying to say with this character, it always stands out to me. But anyway, otherwise, like I said, I think what's going on there is really obvious in terms of the character is inconsistent because the movie is trying to portray so lightly and such a comic, happy way, like real MK Ultra trauma and kind of glorify it in that sense. And obviously that's not tenable. So that's why, that's why the relationship with Alice and the Alice character and all these things like are incoherent in terms of the writing because that's obviously just not thematically coherent.
Here, I'll read this Thompson quote. This is him on the 2000 election. He says, "There was one exact moment, in fact, when I knew for sure that Al Gore would never be president of the United States, no matter what the experts were saying. And that was when the whole Bush family suddenly appeared on TV and openly scoffed at the idea of Gore winning Florida. It was nonsense," said the candidate, "utter nonsense. Anybody who believed Bush had lost Florida was a fool. The media, all of them, were liars and dunces or treacherous whores trying to sabotage his victory. Here was the whole bloody family laughing and hooting and sneering at the dumbness of the whole world on national TV. The old man was the real tip-off. The leer on his face was almost frightening. It was like looking into the eyes of a tall hyena with a living sheep in its mouth. The sheep's fate was sealed, and so was Al Gore's. The whole presidential election, in fact, was rigged and fixed from the start."
Wow, that's so good. That's so good. And Al Gore, of course, I think is an adrenochrome chugger himself. But thinking about the 2000 election, the Bush family. I mean, in light of all this weird stuff going on with Hinckley right now, and in light of how Hinckley fits into all of this and his connections to the Bush family, I think it's so important. And and with Hinckley and the tax, I mean, like it just really blows my mind that Jodie Foster was offered the role of Alice in this movie. I mean, it just goes to show just how
crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, who was the chief beneficiary of if Reagan died, right? George Bush Sr. He was vice president. He would have been president. There's so many weird shootings and things like that happened. I mean, you want to talk about the Manson connection to Nelson Rockefeller. There was one of the Manson family members tried to take a shot at Ford. If you remember, it wasn't successful. She probably was just the patsy, but like a bullet literally missed Ford's head by like 3 or 4 inches.
Crazy, crazy squeaky Trump.
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, all these weird things happen. Like, and the shooting of Reagan, if you remember, it was right at the beginning of his presidency. So like the timing Hinckley had was like for the most advantageous thing to happen to Bush. It's off the charts. It's not funny, but like, yeah. I mean,
you can't help but marvel at it. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's the perfect word.
Sorry, what was that, William?
I was just saying marvel is the perfect word.
Yeah. And that's why it annoys me with Hinckley being in the news. You see all these idiots on Twitter all the time being like, just like, oh, you're such a hero for trying to shoot. It's like, yeah, I'm not a Reagan fan either, but like these people just completely miss that this guy was working for a much, much more satanic faction, and things would have been much worse, I think, had Hinckley succeeded. Oh, by the way, I noticed in the comments someone asked us what we think about Son of Sam. Brett, I think you have a little bit more of a defined opinion on that case there. If you want to give the quick answer to that one.
Well, I mean, I just know like Maury Terry's work. That's where I would say to start. I mean, even the Netflix documentary, Maury Terry's pretty good until like as Jay Dyer reviewed it, to like the last half of the last one where they try to like no. So yeah, I mean, he was part of a satanic group that was connected to military bases around the country. I mean, that much is a fact. I can say that much about it, but it overlaps with Zodiac and a lot of these other things too. And I mean, also look at Dave McGowan's Program to Kill for the background of the serial killer PsyOp in general, including Son of Sam.
Yeah, and you can talk about the Process Church in that. He mentions, I mean, there's interviews with Berkowitz who's mentioning the Process
Church. He used the symbol that was derived from the Process Church.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and by the way, I wanted to say, I mean, I'll have to go in a moment, but that one of the other movies you suggested talking about, William, was A Scanner Darkly, which is also Richard Linklater. I mentioned we talked about Slacker a bit early in the discussion, and so I would like to do another episode at some point if you're up for it. I've never actually seen A Scanner Darkly in full, I must admit, which is probably surprising, but just thinking about Richard Linklater, because Slacker is a really enjoyable movie, and watching his evolving perspective on his old friend Alex Jones as time goes on is interesting, because up to like 2013 he was basically defending him, but he was starting to hedge a little bit more, and then the comments he makes like circa like 2018 he has to distance himself from that kind of conspiracy theorizing entirely, because now the Eye of Sauron has really been trained on that type of conspiracy theorist. So if he wants to continue in Hollywood, he has to disavow. But I think it could be interesting to do Scanner Darkly at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to. Absolutely. I mean, I think the tie-ins with Dick, Jones is the conspiracy theorist guy in the Scanner Darkly, and just like how Dick really captured the circular nature of the drugs criminal system and everything. The guy was brilliant, Philip K. Dick, and just all his kind of weird sci-fi ramblings. What was it, Valis? And like, I don't even know if he's having supernatural events or that all of the speed that he took over decades was rotting his brain. But, I guess that's up to the viewer. But I think there's a lot of interesting themes in Scanner Darkly and a lot of interesting people. Like, you literally have a son of an assassin in there. You've got a guy who came up strange in Hollywood, Jones, and then guys with huge drug problems. I mean, some of these characters are living kind of the Scanner Darkly, which is a play on, we see through a lens, it's a St. Paul statement. So there's a lot there to unpack Scanner Darkly. Linklater too. We can talk about Slackers too if we do another show. But this will be our fourth show. I actually forgot the show we did about Bring Me the Horizon and Bad Habits and stuff like that. So I apologize for that. But maybe we can wrap up if you guys got distractions. Do you guys want to finish with anything to add or anything I missed?
I think we got through most of my notes on conspiracy theory. I'm glad we chose this. Is like I said, this is just such an obvious disinfo op. It's such an obvious movie for us to cover that we hadn't gotten to. So glad we could do it here. I guess I would just end by saying, I hope if people are interested in what we're talking about now, they'll check out our Joker series on our show if we haven't already, that they'll look out for our Jared Leto material that we'll have coming out soon, which is going to be, technically part of that Joker series, as Leto is one of the actors who's portrayed the Joker. And if they haven't, I hope that they check out all the other episodes we've done with you, because that's some of our favorite material that we've done in a while. The Silver Lake discussion was great. And I will die on the hill that Ed Sheeran is a Nazi Satanist. You can quote me on that, and people can listen to our previous episode with you if they want to find out why.
Awesome, yeah. And I will put a link to the individual shows on you. You can see it on iTunes or Spotify. And on just to your larger show, PsyOp Cinema. Really excellent research. So I commend both of you. And also thank you very much for coming back on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for having us on, William.
All right, take care. Keep in touch. All right, see you there.